everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I've got a new video type I'm trying out. It's called Card of the Day. So these are going to be just a little bit of short form content, looking to be between 5 and 10 minutes that I'll be posting basically whenever I feel like I have a good card of the day to talk about. These card of the day cards are going to be cards that I feel are a bit overlooked, or cards that maybe are a little bit underrated, or maybe a card that I feel like I'm using in a different way than most people. Overall, just a card that I have some words on, but might not fit into our normal podcast episode. And by the way, if you're new to the channel, this is all in the context of the limited format, talking about draft and sealed. And today's card of the day is a cool one. It's Knight of Sweet's Revenge, sort of a oddball build around enchantment, a card I don't think is on many people's radars, and it certainly wasn't on my radar until I played a deck that actually really supported it, and I do think it's a strong card in the right deck. So let's hop into why. So to kick us off here, I actually have an example deck where I use Knight of Sweet's Revenge to good effect. This is the sealed deck I played day one of MagicCon Vegas, 100k prize pool, 1500 player event. I actually came in 13th place overall, which I was very happy about. But the deck we're looking at here is just a good, solid black-green mid-range food deck. It's got some good rares, of course, but if you look closely, there's that Knight of Sweet's Revenge here, and it was very good for me and either contributed to or was directly responsible for me winning multiple games over the course of the day. What makes this deck a good deck for Knight of Sweet's Revenge mainly is the abundance of food makers, specifically a handful of them that come down before turn 4, before you're gonna play the Knight of Sweet's Revenge, and I think you need a minimum of like 10 food sources overall. It's nice to have stuff like Scream Puff, which is like a repeatable food source, but I believe this card is performing poorly on average. If you look on 17 land, it's not a very good card, because people put it in a deck where they don't have that 10 food count. Maybe they go like 6, and they're like, oh, it's a food payoff, and I've got food, let me play it. You really want to, in all of your games, play like 1 or 2, ideally 2 or more, food things that come down before turn 3, so when you play the Knight of Sweet's Revenge, it's gonna do its thing right away. And when I say it does its thing when it comes down, what's the thing that it's doing? So there's 3 reasons you're gonna want to play this card, or 3 things that it does, and the main thing you're doing, the main reason you're playing it, is in the right deck, where you've gone food on turn 1, maybe Tough Cookie on turn 2, that's like such a fantastic card with Knight of Sweet's Revenge because it gives you 2 food, and then you play the Knight of Sweet's Revenge on 4, and when you untap with it, you're going to just have so much more mana than your opponent. You get to dump your hand, you get to cast all your expensive stuff, you get to cast your card draw spells, your Rowan's Grim Search, you get to cast both sides of your adventures in one turn. You really do start to overwhelm your opponent, but only if you've already got 3 or so foods on the battlefield. Maybe, 2 or 3, the Knight of Sweet's Revenge spots you one. You're gonna want expensive cards, which, black-green food decks certainly have. Hamlet Glutton, you're gonna want stuff like Tough Cookie or Sweet Tooth Witch, things with activated abilities that you can put the mana into. Card draw, your adventure creatures play very well with Knight of Sweet's Revenge because, like I said, you can play both sides in the same turn often. The idea here is that if you're going to put Knight of Sweet's Revenge in your deck, you need a way to use the mana. You need to have expensive stuff, card draw, activated abilities, because if you're not doing that, well, you're missing out on most of what makes the card good. One of the really cool things about this card is that if you have it in a dedicated food deck, it's kind of quote-unquote free when you cast it, right? If you've got 3 food on the battlefield already, and then you cast Knight of Sweet's Revenge, spotting you a food, you're spending 4 mana, but it instantly gives you back that 4 mana. It's also cool that if you play something like a Gingerbread Hunter or a Tough Cookie, gives you a resource that you can tap right away. So sometimes you get to like chain things. You cast Tough Cookie, tap the food, cast something else, that makes a food, you make something else, right? So you can really go off if you've got enough food and enough expensive stuff in your deck. And the really nice thing is that this set is not short on ways to spend your mana, just mana sinks, even on commons like Baronati, being able to pump that 3 or 4 times in a turn. Obviously, you need the black mana to be able to do that, but it's something that is pretty effective. Or being able to exile your Fairy Dream Thief from your graveyard and cast a big spell in that same turn. Like, all these little things add up. At least in the decks that I've played it in, I've never cast it and just been like, well, I have nothing to do with my mana. So it's something you have to consider, certainly, but it's not like you have to go out of your way to pick up mana sinks. They kind of just exist. The second thing that Knight of Sweet's Revenge does, and this one's not that obvious unless you've played with it, is it gives you threat of activation for your life gain of cracking the food. So, you've played food decks before, I'm sure, and you have this tension of, well, should I, maybe you're at like 10 life, and you're like, should I crack my food because I'm getting a little low in life, or should I develop my board a little bit more? With Knight of Sweet's Revenge, you don't actually have to choose. You can tap your mana, like tap your lands for just casting your creatures or whatever, but because the every 3 food you have, you get to crack one of them for free, your opponent's kind of in this spot where you actually never go shields down, or you very rarely go shields down on tapping out of being able to crack the food. Like if you have no lands up and you've got 3 food, you get to crack one of them. And that's kind of, it's sneaky, right? You don't get, you get to skirt around that tension of, oh, should I tap out, or, you know, should I be cracking my food here? You kind of get to have your cake and eat it too. And then of course, the last thing here is that the least important part of the card, but is still relevant, is it's a board stall breaker. I had multiple times when I was playing that deck, I cracked my Night of Sweet's Revenge in a kind of crowded board and gave me creatures +5/+5, and yeah, that was it. My opponent couldn't handle it. It's not going to be the part of the card you use the most often, because I don't think this format is all that prone to board stalls, but certainly if you're facing another food deck or like a blue-green big deck or something like that, it's going to be a very relevant mode of the card and something your opponent really has to respect. And, you know, just to highlight some cards here that are really good with it, Tough Cookie, like I mentioned, is probably the best one. Stuff you can play on turn 1, like Candy Trail or the Food Adventure of Hollow Scavenger, Sweet Tooth Witch, Welcome to Sweet Tooth. Basically, you know, anything that makes a food, ideally something that makes a food and affects the board too, so that you can, like, you know, block and set up your mana situation. And plus, you know, if you're casting a creature, that's another thing that contributes to getting pumped with the +X/+X effect. You don't have to be too picky about what food payoffs you have. Most of them are just pretty good. But the ones that come with bodies, or the ones that are 1 mana, like you're spending your turn 1 where you normally wouldn't spend your turn 1 to play what is effectively like a mana elf, right? When you get to cast your Night of Sweet's Revenge on turn 4, is a pretty effective setup. And I do like to keep myself honest, kind of fact check myself. So I checked on 17 lands looking at the top player data for this card, and it's a giant increase when this card is played in the hands of good players compared to the average player. I think on, you know, your average aggregate data, all players on 17 lands, this card's winning at like 51% or something, and in the hands of top players in black-green, it's winning at 53.5. Mind you, in a smallish sample size, but a meaningful sample size. And of course, when you look at top player data, it's going to be, you know, Candy Grapple is going to perform better. Even, you know, a very easy to use card is going to perform better in a top player's hand than a medium player's hand, just because they are playing all of their game better. But the increase you see, a 12% increase, is larger than the increase you would see with other cards, right? So it is performing better in top players' hands, even considering that top players generally have a higher win rate. And I believe the explanation of that, of course, is that good players are putting it in their deck when they have that adequate food count, not when they're like, you know, 5-6 food or whatever. So yeah, that's our card of the day, Night of Sweet's Revenge. I will say that this is not a card you need to take highly. Generally, people just pass it. It's going to wield to you. You might even get multiple, although I probably wouldn't want to play more than one of them on my deck. They do get kind of redundant at some point, so, you know, the second one doesn't do all that much. But it's a card that I think people are completely ignoring right now, and I don't think you should. I don't think you should put it in all of your decks, and not even all of your black-green decks. But remember, if you've got that 10+ food count, it's going to be a pretty strong card. So hope you liked this. If you did, leave a comment. Let me know, maybe even if a card you would like me to talk about. Very much open to some suggestions. And we'll be back later this week for another card of the day. See you, everybody.